A peaceful morning at Hollow Creek Nursing Home suddenly shifted when Knox, a German Shepherd who once served in the K9 unit, stopped in front of a plain white wall and began to bark. As if he was calling out to someone still trapped behind it. Each bark echoed like a fragment of memory returning, pulling with it a truth that had remained hidden for 2 decades. What was behind that wall? And why was Knox the only one who could sense it? Early autumn mornings at Hollow Creek Haven usually began the same way, a soft rustle of leaves swaying in the breeze, strands of golden light slipping across dew-kissed grass, and the long benches lining the southern hallway still left untouched. But something felt different today. An old military SUV had just pulled up the entrance path. And from behind the slowly opened door, Knox stepped down. Quiet, deliberate, composed. Knox was once a name spoken with respect by the entire Western Oregon Task Force, a fully trained K9, sharp enough to detect a hidden chemical stash in a remote mountain house with nothing more than an oil-stained footprint. Knox didn't seek attention, never barked unless necessary. But every move he made spoke volumes, precise, unwavering, deeply intentional. His final mission had ended 14 months earlier, after a covert raid on a suspected illegal facility. That operation left Knox with a serious hip injury. The surgery took over 6 hours, and Sarah Nolan, the handler who had been with him since day one, stayed by his side the entire time. They thought he'd never return to the field. But the truth was, Knox didn't need to. He had already left his mark, not just on battlefields, but on the hearts of those who'd seen him in action. Calm, loyal, and relentlessly devoted. The SUV came to a full stop beneath the front awning of Hollow Creek. The white wooden gate still smelled faintly of fresh paint. A modest sign read, "Hollow Creek Long-Term Care, where every life is heard." Sarah stepped out first, opening the rear door. "We're here, soldier," she said gently. Knox looked at her for a moment, then slowly lifted his paw, the soft clink of steel nails tapping the stone steps. Every step carried the weight of a past forged in fire, now turning toward a new chapter, one not lit by sirens or urgency, but by stillness. Inside the reception area, the air was warm with the scent of dried linens and eucalyptus oil. A silver-haired woman knitted quietly in a floral-cushioned chair. A young staff member in a navy blue uniform approached, smiling politely. "Hello, Ms. Nolan? And this is Knox," Sarah replied. "He's a retired K9. He'll be staying here temporarily as part of the federal pilot program for emotional support dogs." The staffer bent slightly to get a better look. Knox stood still, his gaze not hostile, but not ready to trust either. "I've heard about the program," the woman said softly, "but this is the first time our facility's been chosen." Sarah nodded. Hollow Creek was selected for its calm atmosphere, ideal for dogs who've served. And Knox, he needs a place like this. Down the long carpeted hallway, the soft taps of Knox's paws echoed gently, blending with the hum of ceiling fans and distant wind chimes. A few elderly residents looked up. Some smiled, others froze, as if seeing a shadow of someone they once loved, or a memory long faded. Sarah led Knox through the grounds, the southern lawn, a rose garden speckled with lavender, and finally to the eastern wing, where he'd be staying. Each corner bathed in natural light, each space neither too tight nor too open, just enough for Knox to feel like he still had a role, even if that role now was peacekeeping. His room was next to Sarah's temporary office. She would be working part-time to support the program. Though she no longer wore the uniform, she still carried the collar Knox had worn during his first day of training, a quiet reminder of everything they'd been through. That afternoon, with sunlight filtering through the curtains, Knox lay still on a dark brown rug. Sarah sat beside him, notebook open, beginning to track his routines, moods, and behaviors. Anything that might help him adjust. "You're going to be all right," she whispered. "No gunfire here, no tear gas, just time. To breathe. To feel again." Knox opened his eyes. Those deep brown eyes, eyes that had seen too much of what others refused to see, were still alert. But this time they weren't guarded. They were simply watching. Reading the room, the chair, the air around them. And then, very quietly, Knox exhaled. Outside, the wind rolled in gentle waves. A sparrow perched on the balcony railing. Knox raised his head, noticed it, then let it be. There was nothing to protect, nothing to report. Everything felt still. Still enough to almost seem perfect. Sarah refilled his water bowl and gently brushed the fur on his neck. "First day," she said softly. "And you've already done so well." In that tender moment, no one knew that just 3 days later, Knox would break his silence, not to greet, not to demand, but to warn. That the white wall at the end of the hall was not just a wall. And Hollow Creek, a place chosen for its stillness, was about to echo with a sound no one had dared to hear for the last 20 years. 3 days had passed since Knox arrived at Hollow Creek Haven. Mornings at the nursing home moved with a steady rhythm, as if nothing had ever disrupted its routine of tea at 9 and a gentle walk around the courtyard at 4. The elderly residents, seated beneath the willow trees in their wheelchairs, still smiled softly when Sarah passed by with Knox. They called him playful names like Captain, Sheriff, or simply Four-Legged Hero. Knox seemed to accept his new life with the composure of a warrior who had long learned when to speak and when to stand down. His firm steps across the carpeted wooden floors became part of the Eastern Wing's familiar soundtrack. Sarah felt reassured. Maybe, just maybe, Knox was truly ready for a quieter chapter. But then came the 3rd day. The first bark echoed through the hallway at exactly 5:27 p.m., just as Sarah was reviewing behavior notes in her small office. She froze. It wasn't a bark of greeting or triggered by a sudden sound. It was low, firm, and pushed the air in the corridor like something unseen had just shifted. Stepping outside, Sarah found Knox standing motionless in front of a plain white wall near room 312. No nameplate, no window, just a blank surface stretching between 2 rooms. Knox stared at it, ears high, body tense like a bowstring pulled taut. "Knox?" she called gently. The dog glanced back for a heartbeat, then immediately turned forward again and let out a growl. Seconds later, Knox barked, 3 short bursts. Then, without hesitation, he began scratching at the base of the wall with his front paw. Each movement was deliberate and strong, like he was trying to dig through concrete. A nurse passing by stopped in her tracks. Her name was Linda, caretaker of room 314. She furrowed her brow at the scene. "What's going on, Miss Sarah? Is something wrong with Knox?" Sarah didn't answer right away, her eyes fixed on the dog. "I'm not sure. This is the first time he's reacted like this here." Linda exhaled. "Could be stress from the new environment. I've seen dogs act strangely when adjusting. Maybe there's a mouse in the wall?" Sarah nodded slightly, but her gaze had lost the certainty it held when she first arrived. Deep down, she knew. Knox never reacted without reason. The next bark came the following day, same time, 5:27 p.m. Same wall, same 3 barks, same digging, same unflinching stare. Sarah began recording the exact times. Part of her clung to logic, what she'd been taught during K9 training. Maybe it was an echo, or the scent of old food in the ventilation, or a conditioned behavior triggered by something in the environment. But something deeper, something instinctual, told her. Something wasn't right. The next morning she made a video call to an old colleague, Ray, a former behavioral specialist for K9 units. "Do you remember Knox?" she asked. Ray squinted through the screen. "The legend? Took down 3 weapons smuggling rings? Of course I do." Sarah briefly explained what had been happening. Ray was silent for a few seconds, then said, "If it were any other dog, I'd say stress. But if it's Knox, then I think you should trust that bark." "You mean, trust that there's something behind the wall?" "Not something," he replied. "Something that's been unheard." On the 5th day, Sarah walked the corridor with Knox in the morning, outside of the usual barking hour. Nothing. Knox passed the wall without a glance. But come evening, at precisely 5:27, he stopped, barked, and scratched again. Like a biological clock, only instead of telling time, he was sounding an alarm. Sarah began speaking with longtime staff members, people who had worked at Hollow Creek before the ownership and name changed a few years ago. An elderly woman named Mavis, frail and quiet, worked in the laundry room. When she heard the wall near room 312, she paused. "That used to be a hallway that led to a private wing," she murmured, as if pulling memories from the bottom of a well. "There was a room there, I think. Then one day it disappeared. Nobody mentioned it again." "Disappeared?" Sarah echoed. "Yes. One morning there was a door. By the afternoon someone had sealed it with drywall, said it was no longer in use." Sarah didn't respond. Inside her, pieces were beginning to fit together, and they all pointed back to Knox. No one else had noticed it, but something strange was happening. Knox only barked at the exact moment when sunlight came through the hallway window and cast a narrow beam across the base of the wall. A fleeting alignment, meaningless, maybe. But in Knox's world, that beam might be a clue. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stepped out onto the porch, Knox walking silently beside her. In the pale yellow glow of the hallway lights, they stood in quiet, listening to the crickets and the wind rustling the leaves. She rested her hand gently on Knox's head, stroking his erect ears. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered. Knox didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed in the direction of the white wall, the place where, tomorrow, at that same exact hour, the silence would be broken again, by 3 deliberate barks. Night fell softly, like a thin curtain pulled gently across the sky. Hollow Creek Haven sank into quietude. Only the faint creaking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the sighing wind through the old pine trees remained. Sarah sat alone in her small office, beside the window chair where Knox usually rested in the afternoons. The gentle yellow glow of the desk lamp cast light across her face. No longer the calm, part-time counselor's expression, but the contemplative gaze of a woman carrying a past that never quite let go. In her hands was an old photograph, a forgotten moment frozen in time, taken in the border town of Tuckerville, where she and Knox had once led a raid on a suspected drug processing facility. In the picture, Sarah wore a bulletproof vest, her half-smile crooked with adrenaline. Knox stood close to her leg, alert eyes scanning the space beyond the lens, focused, ready. It was their final mission before Knox was injured, and the beginning of a long line of unanswered questions. In the silence of that night, memories returned like waves. The abandoned building in Tuckerville had been caked in the dull brown of chemical dust and time. Sarah remembered the static on the radio, the rush of breath through her earpiece, and the dry, biting chill of a September morning. They'd waited in stillness for over 40 minutes for the green light to breach. Knox, always half a step ahead, picked up an unfamiliar scent while the team was still clearing the ground floor. He led her to a door, metal, unmarked, where a sliver of light sliced through like a blade. When they broke in, the layout didn't match the intel. A hidden lab off the maps. And strangest of all, a sealed, soundproof room with no mention in any blueprint. Knox growled, claws scratching the inner corner of that room, where the outline of a forgotten door had once been. But before they could pry it open, a violent explosion rocked the structure. The team was forced to evacuate, and from that day on, Sarah never knew what was behind that wall. Tonight, as she looked at Knox resting with his head gently on her feet, breathing steady, not tense, but alert, she realized his eyes hadn't changed. He was still watching, still waiting for something unfinished. The next morning, Sarah brought her coffee to the communal lounge. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting soft beams on the wooden floor. In the far corner, a tall, thin man sat alone, his hand trembling slightly as he stirred his tea. His name was Ellis, 86 years old, rarely spoke, but his eyes were deep and bright, like they held a decade's worth of unspoken thoughts. Sarah approached, intending only a polite hello, but Ellis looked at her for a moment, then whispered, almost to himself, "You're the one who brought the dog, aren't you?" Sarah paused. "Yes, his name is Knox." Ellis nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the window. "I've heard him bark, same time, every day, like the way people used to ring bells, not to cry for help, but to signal something." Sarah sat down across from him, her coffee still warm in her hands. "You used to live in the East Wing?" "Since 2004, back when this place was still called West Elm House. You know it?" He looked up. Before room 312 was there, the hallway stretched farther. There was a room at the end. No one ever went in or out. But every night I'd hear scratching. First soft, then frantic, like something trying to claw through the concrete. A chill crept down Sarah's spine. And then? Ellis set his spoon down gently. One day the sound stopped. They built a new wall, shortened the corridor, said it was for renovations. But I know. He looked her straight in the eyes, slowly. Surely. Someone never left. That afternoon, Sarah recorded the entire conversation in her notebook. The details she once dismissed as coincidence. The barking, the shortened hall, the precise light pattern hitting the wall, began to form a pattern. She sat before the old computer in her office, accessing Hollow Creek's architectural archive, back when it was still West Elm House. It took her over an hour to find the original 1997 blueprint in the public records system. When the diagram appeared, Sarah barely breathed. Behind room 312, there was indeed a small box drawn. No label, no purpose indicated. But in the 2018 blueprint, that section was gone, completely omitted. And that spot, precisely where Knox had barked every day for nearly a week, was a perfect match. Late that evening, rain threatened. Thunder rumbled softly on the horizon. Knox lay by Sarah's feet, as always, but this time Sarah no longer looked at him as a retired canine. She saw him as an old friend pulling her back to the truth, reminding her that it wasn't always found where the lights were brightest, but in the corners left behind, where no one dared to look anymore. And Ellis's words echoed again in her mind, like a voice carried on the wind. Someone never left. The sky outside had turned the color of thin lead, hazy but not heavy. The pine trees beyond Hollow Creek Haven swayed in the breeze, whispering through their needles like an ancient forest passing secrets to the air. Sarah and Knox stood in front of the wall near room 312, the same place where, every single day for nearly a week, Knox had stopped, barked 3 times, and scratched hard at the base. But today, Sarah wasn't just standing. She knelt close to the base of the wall, right where the sunlight from the end window poured in, forming a warm, golden streak across the floor. Her eyes traced along the lower edge, where the white paint had begun to peel slightly. Knox stood beside her, ears perked, eyes fixed on the seam between the wall and the tiled floor. "There's something here, isn't there?" she whispered, her voice no louder than a breath. Knox replied with a low growl, not threatening but certain. Gently, Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out a small flashlight. She shone it close to the bottom molding, just beneath the wooden trim, where a thin crack, narrow as a strand of hair, ran from the floor up about half a meter. From afar, it could easily be mistaken for a natural fissure or a line caused by shifting foundations. But up close, she could see it clearly. The cement patching here was slightly different in tone from the surrounding wall, and at the crack's edges were tiny flakes of dried paint, as if someone had hurriedly sealed something behind it. Knox lowered his nose to the crack and began sniffing. His breath came out in steady, short bursts, and then he scratched once, firmly, deliberately. Sarah felt her heart beating faster. The wall wasn't just a structure. It felt like a door someone had deliberately hidden, and Knox was the one holding the key. That night, after most of the residents had gone to bed, Sarah quietly returned to her office. She powered on the computer and accessed Hollow Creek's internal archive system. Most of the files had been updated post-2019 when the facility changed ownership, but she needed something older. She navigated to the Digitized Records by Request section, hoping some remnants from the West Elm House era still remained. After nearly half an hour, she found a folder labeled Renovation Layout, Second Floor, East Wing Corridor. When the blueprint loaded, Sarah held her breath. The 1998 floor plan showed the hallway stretching nearly 6 meters longer than it did today. Specifically, between rooms 312 and 314, there was a labeled space, room 313, with no accompanying description. In the 2019 plan, room 313 was gone, replaced by a straight, featureless wall connecting the two rooms. Sarah printed the older diagram and circled the area of room 313 with a red pen. She didn't say anything, just turned toward Knox, who lay on the rug nearby, eyes half-lidded but still open. "We've found it," she whispered. Knox didn't bark. He simply raised his ears slightly and gave a slow wag of his tail, as if, at last, everything was moving in the right direction. The next morning, Sarah brought the printed diagram to Ms. Alina, the keeper of the facility's original paper records. Ms. Alina was a neatly dressed woman of age, with silver chain glasses and a formal, polished air. But when Sarah pointed to room 313, she paused. "This room? That's odd. I don't see it in the current listing." "But it existed. This is the 1998 design." Ms. Alina was quiet for a moment, then searched the drawers of a filing cabinet. "Let me check the 2010 renovation logs. Ah, here." She pulled out a set of yellowed papers with a rough textured cover. Sarah flipped through them. In the list of decommissioned and restructured areas, the note under the east wing read simply, "Room 313, unused, repurposed into technical wall space." Sarah left the record room with the blueprint in hand, her mind spinning. That afternoon, at exactly 5:27 p.m., she and Knox stood before the wall once again. This time, she brought a steel ruler. Measuring from room 312 to 314, the total distance came out to 11.2 meters. But according to the old design, it should have been nearly 17 meters. The discrepancy couldn't be explained by ceilings, walls, or service structures alone. She crouched down again and shone her light into the fine crack. Then, using the handle of the ruler, she tapped gently along the wall's surface. The sound wasn't the same. To the right of room 312, the knock was solid, dense. But at the midpoint, where Knox always scratched, the sound was deeper, more hollow. "There's space behind it," she murmured. Knox leaned forward, releasing a soft growl, not of warning, but as if keeping a vow. If something had been hidden behind these layers of cement, he would be the first to lead her there. That night, Sarah sat at her desk with 2 blueprints laid out before her, one old, one new. The evening breeze stirred through the open window. Knox lay curled at her feet, half asleep but still keeping watch. She placed her finger on the circled section marked Room 313, and for the first time, she said it aloud. "We're going to find the truth, not out of curiosity, but because someone was forgotten." A morning mist blanketed Hollow Creek Haven, wrapping the nursing home in a veil of white memory. Dew clung to the window panes, dripping down the aged wooden frames. The quiet shuffling of nurses' shoes, the near-silent spin of wheelchair wheels, everything moved like breath. And in the middle of that hushed stillness, Sarah sat at a long wooden table in the basement archive room. Once more, she had returned to the place where the fragments of the past were buried beneath layers of time and dust. She turned each brittle page in the folder marked Renovation Records 2000 to 2005. The documents were faded, ink smudged, edges yellowed with age, but most of the architectural diagrams remained intact. In the middle of the stack, Sarah stopped, her eyes fixed on a page stamped faintly at the bottom. West Elm House, Structural Layout 2003. Her finger traced the East Wing corridor, past room 305, 307, and then room 309. A small square, tucked left off a secondary hall, positioned right where the current supply storage for the logistics staff now stood. She quickly laid the blueprint beside the 2019 layout she had printed earlier. The corridor was still there. Rooms 305 and 307 were accounted for, but 309, completely gone. With a red pen, she circled the empty space and murmured to herself, "No one erases a room, unless they don't want it remembered." Sarah went straight to the administration office to meet the head of the facility, Evelyn Morse, a tall, composed woman in her 50s, who spoke in a voice as even and emotionless as an answering machine. Evelyn greeted her with a polite smile and a cup of warm chamomile tea. "Ms. Nolan, what can I help you with this morning?" Sarah placed the 2 floor plans on the table. "I'd like to ask about room 309. It appears in this 2003 plan, but it's missing from the 2019 version." Evelyn frowned slightly. "Room 309? That doesn't ring a bell. We only go up to 308 in that wing." Sarah leaned in. "When did you take over management of Hollow Creek?" "Late 2020, Evelyn replied. "I'm the 3rd director since the center was renamed. The records I received didn't include anything about removed rooms." "Have you reviewed the original transfer documents?" Sarah asked, keeping her tone steady. Evelyn let out a small sigh. "I did, but they were thin. The previous administrator left little behind. They mentioned a planned expansion for technical infrastructure in the East Wing, but never said anything about room 309. Sarah paused, then picked up her printout. "I believe there's something behind these changes. It may have nothing to do with you, but I need to confirm it." Evelyn studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you'd like, I can grant you access to the original records archive, but only at night. During the day, that space is used for storing medical supplies." Sarah stood and thanked her. It was a late-night opportunity, but at least it was a legal crack in the door. That evening, Sarah and Knox returned to the basement, this time with a headlamp, thin gloves, and a notepad. The archive space felt like a forgotten library. The air was heavy with damp paper, decaying wood, and dust thick enough to blur the labels on each wooden drawer. Knox walked silently beside her, nose close to the floor, ears attuned to the shelves as if listening for the whispers of the past. Sarah began scanning box after box. 1 hour passed, then 2. Most contained administrative memos, old payroll sheets, prescriptions, until she opened a folder with no label. Inside was a series of internal review documents from 2002 to 2006. In the middle of the stack, one line caught her breath. Room 309, long-term observation subject. Status: unresponsive to treatment. Transferred to static monitoring protocol. No external contact permitted. Sarah furrowed her brow. Subject? She turned the page. A torn sheet, corner missing, its text blurred by water stains. Do not allow patient to interact with new staff. Recommend acoustic isolation. Her heart pounded. There was no longer any doubt. Someone had been kept in that room. Not a regular patient. Not a staff member. Someone deliberately removed from the record. Sarah brought the folder back to her office. She didn't alert the director, didn't call the police. Instead, she placed it on the desk in front of Knox, who, lying on the rug, perked up as she entered. You led me to the right place, she said, laying the file down. Knox stepped forward and sat beside her, silent as always. But this time Sarah placed a hand gently on his head. This story didn't begin today. It began 2 decades ago. The overhead light cast their shadows on the wall, Sarah and Knox, side by side, the silhouette of 2 figures in search of truth. Early the next morning, thin clouds stretched across the sky like drifting smoke. The sunlight filtered through the windows of the east wing, casting a pale golden band along the worn tile floor. The elderly residents remained at their usual tea tables, nodding at Sarah as she passed. But in their eyes, there was something thoughtful, almost as if they, too, could feel the quiet footsteps edging closer toward something long hidden. As Sarah exited the administration office, she saw a man waiting just outside the door. He wasn't in uniform, just a plain suit, holding a worn leather briefcase and wearing a small name badge. Daniel Cross, Internal Affairs Liaison, County Medical Center. Ms. Nolan? He asked, his voice polite. Sarah nodded. Yes, that's me. Would you mind taking a short walk with me? The two walked side by side down the quiet hallway. The sharp, steady sound of Cross's leather shoes tapping against the tiles echoed with a dry rhythm. We've been informed that you've been reviewing some of the old records, the architectural drawings and documents from the West Elm House era, he began calmly. Yes, Sarah replied. I'm looking into some unusual structural changes, especially concerning room 309. Cross came to a stop. He turned slightly, eyes fixed on her with the look of someone evaluating a chess move that had gone off course. Do you know why those records were never added to the official system? He asked. Sarah didn't answer, holding his gaze. Because, Cross continued, some things aren't meant to be revisited. This facility changed ownership, changed names, was rebuilt. The people from before are gone. Digging into what's buried only complicates things. You understand? Sarah gave a dry smile. I'm not looking for trouble, Mr. Cross. I'm looking for the truth. He shrugged, offered a faint nod, and turned to leave. But even as his footsteps faded, Sarah could still hear the echo of his final words. You should let the past stay in the walls. That night, the air in the facility felt heavier than usual. Gusts of wind struck the windows, causing the curtains to sway gently. The hallway lights dimmed, the warm yellow glow muffled as if under a layer of mist. Sarah and Knox didn't sleep. She sat in her chair, eyes fixed on the empty corridor beyond the glass, while Knox lay curled beneath her, his head raised, ears pricked, not relaxed like usual, but alert. Near midnight. A faint thud echoed. Sarah sat up straight, eyes darting toward the hallway, toward the endless stretch of white wall near room 309 that disappeared into the darkness. Knox growled softly. Another thud, then another. 3 knocks. Slow, measured. Sarah stepped out of the room. Knox followed close. As they moved toward the wall, she saw nothing. No figure, no footsteps, no sound of doors. Just the wall, aged, pale, spotless, and whatever lay behind it, she didn't know. Knox advanced, nose pressed to the segment between room 308 and the old storage area. He sniffed deeply, then let out a growl, low and sharper than anything she had heard from him before. "Is someone in there?" Sarah whispered, even though she knew there would be no reply. She tapped her fingers gently on the wall. 3 times. A response. Thud, thud, thud. Her heart pounded. There was no doubt left. This was a sign of life, not rodents, not pipes. Someone, or something, was trying to be heard. The following morning, Sarah returned to the archive, this time searching with more precise keywords: special medical cases, unidentified patients, transfer logs. She found a small file, buried between 2 crumbling folders. The label was faded and marked with an outdated internal code. Inside, there were only a few lines. ID 309207. Subject unresponsive. No public interaction permitted. Silence protocol required. Do not reopen. She folded the page, looked up at Knox. He was standing near the file cabinet, gaze fixed in the direction of the east wall, as if he too had heard what happened last night. Sarah exhaled slowly. We're not backing away anymore. Night air slipped through the old window frames, whispering down the east wing hallway like voices too faint to understand. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, creating a stuttering rhythm of darkness and dim light, like the pulse of something strained. The clock on the wall clicked past 2:03 a.m. Sarah wasn't sleeping. Neither was Knox. They sat together in the small room at the end of the corridor, where Sarah had temporarily moved her desk to keep closer watch. The window was cracked open, letting in the scent of damp grass and the hum of nighttime insects. On the table, her old blueprint lay covered in red markings. At its center, room 309, now just an anonymous stretch of wall, circled in thick red ink. Knox lay at her feet, head resting on his front paws, eyes fixed on the door. Silent, like a tree waiting patiently for the first light of dawn. Then, thud. Sarah looked up. Thud! Knox perked up, his body stretching, eyes shifting left, toward that cold, pale wall that looked harmless in the light. Thud. 3 knocks. Again. Deliberate. With intent. Sarah rose, her hand closing gently around her flashlight. She didn't need to shine it. Knox had already begun to lead. He stepped forward, slow, nose close to the ground, ears standing high, each step as if walking into a memory he had never forgotten. They stopped at the wall between room 308 and the old storage room. Knox stood motionless, ears fully upright, breathing slow. Sarah leaned her ear to the wall. Could she hear anything? Something faint, a trace of breath, like air from lungs barely strong enough to exhale. She stepped back half a pace, and again, 3 knocks. Thud, thud, thud. This time it was close, not muffled by thick plaster, not distant. The sound came from less than a meter behind the drywall. Sarah tightened her grip on the flashlight. She wasn't hesitating anymore. Pulling out her phone, she dialed 911. Emergency services. How may I assist you? My name is Sarah Nolan. I'm at Hollow Creek Haven Nursing Home, East Wing corridor. I just heard 3 deliberate knocks from behind a sealed wall. I believe someone may be trapped inside." "Which wall, ma'am?" "Between room 308 and the supply room, what used to be room 309. I have original blueprints to confirm it." "Are you sure this wasn't just normal facility noise? Mice, pipes?" "No," Sarah interrupted firmly. "I've heard it 3 nights in a row. Tonight it was clear, human, 3 distinct knocks, and a breath, very faint. I'm a former K9 operations officer. I know the difference." The voice on the other end of the line lowered. "We're dispatching a team. Estimated arrival in 10 minutes. Stay where you are. Do not engage. Understood." "Understood." Sarah ended the call and turned to Knox. He was still standing there, like a living statue guarding a secret. The light above them flickered once more, then steadied. Sarah sat down beside him, her hand resting gently on his back. "You were right," she whispered. "From the very first day, you knew." Knox turned his head, meeting her gaze with calm eyes that carried the weight of 100 unspoken truths. He didn't need words. That look alone said it all. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The east hallway fell silent again. The clock ticked to 2:08. And in that stillness, just when Sarah thought everything had gone quiet, a faint breath emerged from behind the wall. Thin as thread, soft as morning mist, but unmistakable. Someone was still alive. The first sound broke like thunder in the middle of the night, the sharp crack of a hammer striking drywall. Small pieces of plaster fell with each hit, soft yet echoing deep, as if knocking directly against Sarah's heart. She stepped back slightly, her hand resting on Knox's back, both of them watching intently as the white wall, which had hidden the truth for 2 decades, began to crumble. 3 responders from Tulotown's Rapid Rescue Unit were the first on scene. Behind them came a structural engineer and 2 local officers. The hallway, normally dim, now blazed under the glare of floodlights. They worked in silence, the air thick, heavy with the weight of something no one dared to name. Sarah held up the old blueprint, pointing clearly at the crack and the altered segment in the 2003 design. She spoke each word with certainty. "Here, right in the center, beneath the old utility duct. If there's anyone left, they're inside this space." Knox sat beside her, eyes flickering with each strike against the wall, as if every blow was awakening something deep within his memory. Then, with the 5th strike, the drywall split, a soft pop, like the last breath being released. The engineer crouched, shining his light along the fracture. "There's a void behind it!" he shouted. "It's a sealed room!" A few more strikes, and a large section of the wall gave way, revealing a dark, narrow gap. The stench rushed out, mold, rusted metal, and something else. The suffocating scent of time trapped too long. No one spoke, but instinctively, they all took a step back. Something inside them knew what was coming wouldn't be easy to forget. A flashlight beam swept into the dark, and the light caught on a shape. Human. She lay curled, spine arched, knees drawn to chest like a child in the womb. Her hair was matted, streaked with silver gray, her skin wrinkled, pale as ash. Her eyes were wide open under the light, wild with a fear so fragile it seemed she might shatter if someone touched her. Sarah couldn't speak. She had prepared for many possibilities, but nothing like this. A woman, alive after more than 20 years in darkness. "She's breathing!" one EMT shouted. The team surged forward. One rescuer slid through the gap, carefully lifting the woman's frail body. Her skin was ice cold, her frame emaciated, but she was alive. "Eliza Ray," Sarah whispered, a name surfacing from memory. A name she had seen once in a redacted file, without reason or explanation. As Eliza was brought into the light, her body shivered. Her lips trembled. Her eyes blinked rapidly, like they couldn't believe the brightness was real. She trembled like a bird meeting wind for the first time. Then, Knox stepped forward. He approached slowly, head lowered, tail still. Knox sat down just half a meter away, his ears upright, his eyes soft, deep, as if delivering a message from a place beyond language. Eliza Ray looked at Knox. Something shifted. Her shaking stopped. Her breathing steadied. Her eyes, still wide, focused for the first time on Knox. Her frail hand lifted and fell. But Knox leaned forward, resting his large head into her open palm, as if it was something he had always done. No sound, just connection. Recognition. Life. "Lay her down gently," the EMT called. A blanket was brought, vitals checked, and the rescue team leader phoned the county hospital to ready the trauma unit. As Eliza was secured to the stretcher, she didn't resist, just turned her head, eyes still fixed on Knox. And then, in a voice dry and brittle as wind, "You heard me." Sarah shivered. The sentence was broken, but she understood every word. "No one listened. Not for 20 years, but you came back." Knox followed the stretcher, step for step, not leaving her side until the doors of the ambulance closed. When silence returned to the corridor, only Sarah remained, standing before the broken wall. Bare, scarred, but no longer hiding. In that void, the truth had finally found room to breathe. And just as Sarah bent down to pick up the old blueprint, a sound drifted out from the dark corner of the sealed room. Another breath. Fainter. Lighter. But still there. She looked up, her heart clenched. Maybe. Eliza wasn't the only one. Eliza Ray now lay in the trauma recovery unit at St. Joseph's Hospital, bathed in the soft golden glow of a bedside lamp. Her skin was paper-thin and pale, a small oxygen tube nestled beneath her nose, the monitor beeping in slow, rhythmic ticks. But Sarah's heart was anything but steady, not after what she had just witnessed. Knox sat at the foot of the hospital bed, unmoving, unwavering, his gaze locked on the elderly woman, despite the nurses, the doctors, and the wary stares peering in from the hallway. Sarah reached out and touched Eliza's wrist, thin warmth, but real. "Can you hear me?" she asked softly, voice barely above a whisper. After a moment, Eliza's eyelids fluttered. She didn't look directly at Sarah, but past her, toward Knox. When their eyes met, her lips quivered. Then, from that fragile crack, a voice emerged. "He never forgot me." Sarah's throat tightened. Your name is Eliza Ray, isn't it?" A faint nod. "Can you tell me what happened to you?" A long pause, and then, against all expectations, Eliza spoke. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "I was a nurse." Eliza was on IV fluids and under close monitoring, but the doctors allowed her a brief 15-minute conversation with Sarah. Sitting by the hospital bed, notebook in hand, Sarah was ready to write, but her eyes never left the face of the woman who had been entombed behind a wall for over 20 years. Eliza spoke slowly, each word like a thin slice of memory, pieced back together from a life long buried. "I used to work here, at Hollow Creek Haven, back when it was still run by a pharmaceutical group called Synvia Therapeutics." The name stopped Sarah cold. In 2002, they started testing a program, something they called neural isolation therapy. At first, it sounded like an advanced treatment for elderly patients with mild psychiatric conditions. But later, Eliza paused. Her eyes closed for a second, as if trying to suppress something. Later, I realized it wasn't therapy. It was a form of confinement. They injected medications, then isolated patients in dark rooms, for weeks, even months, just to observe reactions. Sarah's grip tightened around her pen. You spoke out? Eliza nodded. I sent internal reports. I said it was inhumane. I told them this wasn't medicine anymore. It was systematic punishment. A heavy silence pressed down on the room. Then one night, they told me I needed a mental health evaluation, took me to Sinvia's Central Hospital. They never let me leave. Eventually, they brought me back here, not as a nurse, but as a patient. Sarah felt her chest constrict. They locked you away for 20 years, just because you disagreed. Eliza gave a weary smile. Bitter, but still holding a flicker of light. I wasn't the only one. They called us non-compliant cases, people who reacted poorly to the drugs, people they couldn't control. Sarah glanced down at Knox, lying beside the hospital bed like a sentinel. His eyes were still open, and in them she saw that familiar alertness, the same presence she had relied on through every mission they had ever worked. Do you remember anyone else who was placed in that program? Eliza closed her eyes, drawing in a long breath. There was someone named Grace, an old man named Jonas, and I think someone from internal records, a young woman with curly hair, but I don't remember her name. Sarah wrote everything down. Each name was a thread, a needle piercing through the fabric of a faded past. After the conversation, Sarah left the hospital. Her heart was heavy, but her mind was clearer than ever. There was no doubt left. This was no longer just about a wall or a sealed-off room. It was about lives, people who had existed and had been deliberately erased. Knox walked beside her, each step steady and sure. At the parking lot, Sarah paused and looked down at her companion. We've only just begun, haven't we? Knox lifted his head, the breeze catching his thick golden fur, tail giving a soft sway. It was only a silent signal, but it was firm. The answer was yes. That morning, Hollow Creek Haven lay veiled in mist. The first shafts of sunlight threaded through the tall pines beyond the window, casting a silvery hue over the long corridor. Moisture clung to the glass panes, leaving faint smudges like ghostly shadows of memory slipping past. Sarah returned to the facility with Knox, not led by instinct this time, but by something far more deliberate. After speaking with Eliza, she couldn't sit still. The words echoed in her mind. I wasn't the only one. Which meant there were still pieces left to find, and Knox, silent as a compass, seemed to have sensed it long before she had. They entered the older wing, the section that had once housed special care units before 2003. It was nearly abandoned now, used only for storage. Maintenance staff visited only on rare occasions. Knox stopped in front of a wall across from room 315, where soft light streamed through a fogged window, scattering blotches of shadow and glow across the floor. The dog didn't bark. He simply slowed, lowered his head, and sniffed along the aging tiles. A light scratch echoed. Sarah dropped to her knees instantly, examining the ground along Knox's path. The floor tiles here were worn and pale, but one of them didn't quite match. It was slightly raised, and a faint edge traced its perimeter, like it had once been lifted and replaced, but not perfectly. From her pocket, Sarah pulled out a small utility knife and gently pried along the seams. With a soft pop, the tile came loose. Beneath it was a hollow space. Inside, wrapped in silvered cloth, now spotted with mildew, was a small metal box. Sarah lifted it out, her palm now smudged with dust. There was no lock. She opened it. The scent of moldy paper and time poured out immediately. Inside lay a dark brown leather notebook, its hardcover cracked and frayed at the corners, but its spine still intact. There was no title, only a single hand-drawn symbol, a circle crossed by 3 diagonal lines. Sarah turned to the first page. The handwriting was delicate, slanted slightly to the right. Black ink. Each line was a fragment of a life, a cut of buried truth. July 4th, 2003, they began injections for Group 2 under the new trial batch, labeled Phase 3 Isolation Serum. Patient ceased verbal response within 48 hours, stared at the walls. Didn't blink. Next page. July 15th, a man arrived to inspect the room. Black shirt, red tie, no introduction. Only one question. Who still shows signs of independent thought? I didn't answer. Internal file listed his name as Kenny. That name, Kenny, made Sarah sit upright. Eliza had once mentioned the final supervisor, but never named him. She turned the page. Each entry read like a descent into darkness. The notes described cognitive realignment sessions, experiments with flickering light, isolation in sealed rooms, and injections with untraceable drugs. Some pages had been torn out, but what remained was enough. This wasn't therapy, it was control, neurological manipulation, the erasure of human identity buried in silence, then labeled science. Sarah turned to Knox. You found it, just like always. Knox looked at her, ears tilting slightly, eyes glimmering, as if to say, I hear what you don't. That evening, Sarah brought the notebook to St. Joseph's Hospital. Eliza was awake now, able to talk more. Her eyes, though tired, were sharper than the day before. Sarah placed the notebook gently on her lap. Is this yours? Eliza looked down. A long breath pushed from her chest. Yes, I hid it, beneath the old records room, after a night shift. Her trembling fingers turned the pages, brushing each line of ink like a familiar scar. I thought, no one remembered, no one cared. But you still wrote. Eliza smiled faintly. Because if I didn't write, then none of it would have existed at all. On the way back, Sarah paused in the ground floor corridor of the nursing home. The night breeze slipped through the door crack, carrying the scent of garden leaves from the backyard. She looked at Knox, who now sat quietly beneath an old landscape painting, a meadow glowing in sunlight, wildflowers blooming under a distant horizon. Knox's gaze seemed to ask, What now? Sarah ran a hand along his head, murmured, Now, we find Kenny. Later that night, she sat motionless in front of her computer, her hand slowly gliding across the mousepad. It was late. Outside, the streetlights in the small town blinked occasionally, like breathing in slow motion. Beside her, Knox lay curled under the desk, one ear twitching with each keystroke. On screen, floor plans appeared, layouts of nursing facilities in 3 different states, Colorado, Nevada, and Texas. She had spent nearly a week tracing and requesting these documents through old contacts in the industry, and what Sarah found chilled her to the bone. A pattern. Each of the 3 care centers, just like Hollow Creek Haven, contained a mysterious void. A room that once existed, later erased from all blueprints under the guise of renovation. Their positions were identical, nestled between 2 confirmed rooms, as if someone had deliberately altered the maps to erase a person. Sarah typed a few more notes. Glenridge Care Center, Colorado, room 218A, missing from 2010 floor plan. Cedar Pines Residential Facility, Nevada, 3-meter void between laundry and supply. Silver Garden Retreat, Texas. Room 107B, shown in 2001, erased in 2012 update. She stared at the list like it was a silent indictment. One hand on the mouse, the other reaching for her phone. The first contact pinned in her list. Agent Reese Larkin, DOJ, Crimes Against Vulnerables Division. Reese, once a colleague, now a senior federal investigator. Not quick to trust, but once earned, he never let go. Sarah texted, "Need to meet. You have to see this. It's urgent." Minutes later, her phone buzzed. Reese was calling. "I'm guessing you don't text me at midnight just to catch up." Number I found 3 deleted floor plans, each from a nursing facility previously run by Synvia Therapeutics or its subsidiaries. Like Hollow Creek? Not just similar, identical. Same erased rooms, same renovation periods post-2000. I'm sending you the scans now. Send them. Sarah attached the documents, schematics, and several excerpts from Eliza's notebook. Reese called again after 20 minutes. This time his voice had lost its usual calm. "Sarah, you've just opened something big. What did you find?" Glenridge was once operated by a company called Solvara Management, but Solvara was a former subsidiary of Synvia, renamed after a lawsuit in 2009. Cedar Pines is tied to a financial group called Helix West, and guess who used to be their technical director? Say it. Kenny S. Hall, full name, Kenneth S. Hall, former medical license holder, suspended in Oregon, the same place Eliza was imprisoned. Sarah said nothing. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Reese continued, "I need you to secure everything you have. I'm contacting the district DOJ office to request full investigation into the remaining facilities." "You believe me?" Number I believe Knox. The next day, Sarah returned to Hollow Creek with a different presence. She was no longer alone. Each step down the worn corridors now left a deeper imprint, carrying purpose, urgency, and the weight of justice. She paused at the very spot where Knox had first discovered the crack. Resting her hand on the cold wall, Sarah could feel it. Just beyond this concrete surface was an entire world of the forgotten. Knox stood beside her, head slightly tilted. His eyes glimmered in the misty morning light. "We're not just looking for one person," Sarah whispered. Knox answered with a quiet breath, as if he understood it all, and was still ready. She pulled out the small notebook from her coat pocket and added a single line beneath the list of nursing homes with missing rooms. "Every wall hides a name, and this time, we will call it out." It was a cold morning in southern Montana. The fog was so dense that even the trail leading into the woods looked like a faded memory. Standing atop a slope of red earth, Sarah tightened her grip on Knox's leash. Beside her stood Agent Reese Larkin and 2 federal officials. Down below them, drained of life and color, sat the Meadowfield Recovery Complex, an abandoned rehabilitation facility that hadn't seen movement in nearly a decade. "Concrete walls, no blueprints, no renovation records, nothing on paper," Reese murmured. Sarah nodded, eyes fixed on the aging structure. The once white building was now peeling and blotched with moss along one side, yet its core stood solid. Its silhouette didn't resemble a place meant for healing. It looked more like a silent fortress, built to conceal, not to care. The anonymous tip had come late at night, spoken by a raspy female voice, leaving behind only a few cryptic words. "Meadowfield, check the last room in Hall B, no map, just concrete. No name, no number." But Sarah knew, like before, Knox had sensed something in that voice. He hadn't slept all night, pacing by the window, occasionally sniffing at the air like he was waiting for a sign. The front iron doors groaned slightly as the team finished cutting the lock. Inside was damp darkness, thick with mold, and the sharp, lingering scent of old antiseptics. Shredded papers and soaked files littered the floor, their ink long blurred into nothing. The corridor split into two branches. Reese glanced at a rough map drawn from satellite imaging. Hall B's to the left, last hallway. No interior layouts exist. All design records were relocated to Synvia's main office before they dissolved. Knox moved ahead, nose low, eyes scanning, ears alert. Sarah said nothing. She simply followed. With flashlights cutting into the gloom, every footstep echoed like a sound released from time itself. At the end of Hall B, Knox stopped. He padded silently to the far left corner, where the flashlight beam lit a flat, cold slab of concrete wall. Sarah directed her beam toward it. There, in the corner, was a faint groove, as if a doorway had once existed but had been sealed shut. She knelt, running her fingers across the smooth surface. Near the bottom edge, she found it, a small crescent-shaped scratch, like a fingernail dragged into stone. At that moment, Knox whimpered softly and lay down flat against the floor, eyes locked on the wall. Reese gave a silent signal to the tech team. One of them brought over a thermal scanner. After a few moments, a thick blue outline appeared on the monitor. "There's a cavity behind this wall," the technician reported. "About 3 meters wide. No vents. No entry points." Sarah turned to Reese. "We open it." The screech of a concrete saw filled the corridor, slow and heavy. Dust bloomed in clouds. Knox remained still, just like that first time at Hollow Creek, his eyes fixed on the wall, waiting. Finally, a slab broke free, revealing a hollow chamber, dark, windowless, and silent. Inside stood a single iron bed frame, a rotted wooden cabinet, and a wall of bulletin boards cluttered with dust-covered handwritten notes. No one was there, but someone had been. A broken plastic cup still sat on the table. Folded neatly beside it was a hand-drawn electrical schematic. Sarah picked it up and unfolded the paper. A circular symbol, marked with 3 slashes, ran through the center, the exact same marking from Eliza's notebook. "This wasn't just a holding room," Sarah whispered. "It was a control room." "Control for what?" Reese asked. Before she could answer, Knox let out a low growl. His eyes shifted to a second wall inside the room. Sarah approached and placed her hand on it. Cold. But there was a sound, a subtle noise. Could have been mechanical, wind, or something else entirely. "There's another layer behind this wall," she said. "Could be an access corridor." Reese gave a nod. "Expand the cut." When the second wall was removed, it revealed a narrow, descending hallway. The light from their flashlights reflected off rusted directional signs. One rusted plaque still held legible words. Zone D, Phase 3, Patient Observation. Sarah looked at Reese. She didn't need to explain. He understood. The second base wasn't where it ended. It's where it began. Reese exhaled slowly. Knox stepped forward, eyes fixed on the darkened passage ahead, and wagged his tail once, as if to say, "Ready." The air in the basement was thick, unmoving, and unsettlingly still. Each footstep echoed across the dust-covered tiles, rebounding off the damp walls with a dry, hollow sound, as if the building itself were exhaling fragments of long-buried memories. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, casting scattered, trembling patches of light across the corridor walls like restless shadows. Ahead, Knox came to a sudden stop. He stood completely still, ears perked, head slightly tilted to the left. Then, a sharp, decisive bark pierced the underground silence. It wasn't a warning. It was direction. Sarah stepped forward, aiming the light at an old iron door. On it, the number 207 was faintly scratched in with something sharp. There was no handle, only a rusted lock that looked untouched for years. Reese reached into his back pocket for the lockpick tools. The door screeched as it opened, a high metallic sound that seemed to stretch from the depths of the past. Sarah turned her face from the rising dust. But Knox didn't move, his gaze fixed firmly into the darkness beyond the doorway. The light swept into the room. It was cold and windowless, no more than 20 square meters, with no vents and no airflow. But there, inside, were 2 human forms, each strapped to an iron bed with faded medical restraints. Sarah moved closer, heart clenching. A frail, white-haired man lay motionless, skin drawn tight over bone, lips cracked, collar threadbare. Beside him, an elderly woman lay curled up, her body tense, eyes unfocused, but blinking slowly with each shallow breath. "They're alive!" Reese shouted. "They're both alive!" A rapid response team was summoned immediately. Sarah carefully undid the woman's restraints. As her arm was released, the woman flinched and glanced wildly around the room, then stopped, staring directly at Knox. And in that dim, windowless space, something gentle unfolded. Knox stepped quietly to the edge of the bed, lowered his head, and lay down at her feet. His posture, calm, steady, seemed to speak without words. "It's okay now. You're safe." The woman said nothing, but the corner of her eye trembled. A single tear slipped free, not from pain, but perhaps because she had waited so long to see kindness again. As for the man, after being given a temporary IV, he whispered something faint and cracked, like wind scraping through stone. Sarah leaned in. "Can you speak?" He looked past her flashlight and toward the emblem printed on Reese's jacket. With the last of his strength, he said 3 words. "You came, finally." Sarah choked back emotion. Those words weren't a plea for help. They were release. An hour later, ambulances arrived. Medics in hazmat suits carefully transported the 2 survivors from the basement. As the gurneys rolled through the mildew-stained corridor, sunlight touched the entrance for the first time in years. "Vitals are stable but weak," one doctor reported. "Slow cognitive response, but awareness is present. Immediate ICU required." Reese gently placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You just saved 2 more lives." Again. But Sarah only looked after the fading stretcher, then reached down to stroke Knox's head. It was Knox. Without him, no one would have even known this basement existed. Knox met her gaze, no pride in his eyes, only quiet certainty. A silence more trustworthy than any spoken promise. Once the forensic team secured the basement, the investigators gathered remaining evidence from room 207, handwritten medical records, degraded audio tapes, and a shattered plastic sign that still bore the words, "Phase 3, non-responsive patient." Sarah stepped outside, sunlight slicing across her back. The air was cold but clean. She stood near the vehicle, Knox sitting close by, his eyes still fixed on the basement entrance, as if sensing something yet unresolved. Reese walked up, holding a faded photocopied article they'd recovered from the room. "Memory Study Program, Isolation Therapy, Synvia Therapeutics enters Phase 3 trials." Sarah examined it closely. Her eyes stopped at a margin note, scribbled by hand. "If no response, keep still. Do not expose." She looked at Reese, then at Knox. "There's more," she said. Reese nodded, and as if to confirm it, Knox suddenly stood and turned toward the far end of the rehab center's backyard. His tail gave one deliberate wag. Sarah didn't know why, but she knew it wasn't over. The pale gray sky stretched like a veil over the grounds, blanketing old secrets in mist. Deep within Meadowfield Recovery Complex, just as the investigation team finished clearing the first basement, they uncovered another chamber, hidden behind a false wall near the maintenance stairwell. No lock, just a steel sheet, welded together in 2 segments and sealed with industrial adhesive, unmistakable evidence of a professional cover-up. When the wall was cut open, a sharp, musty odor spilled out, a mix of rotting paper, rusted metal, and the stale breath of time. The room, about the size of a delivery truck, held roughly 20 file boxes arranged in 3 waist-high rows. No beds, no medical equipment, only documents and silence. Sarah stepped in first. Reese followed, his flashlight sweeping across the labels. Knox waited quietly at the doorway, his ears flicking with each breath from the humans inside, as if he too could feel that this place held something far heavier than any locked room above. On every file cover, one detail stood out. Each was marked with a red label. Not ink, but industrial adhesive tape, handwritten in bold, Synvia Therapeutics Archive. Protocol disrupted. Redirect to long-term silence. And on a few, no recovery, humane termination. Sarah opened the nearest file. The first page showed a photograph of a woman, dark hair, glasses, a faint smile. Beneath it, Subject 27A, Annika Lowell, resistance phase, non-compliant. The following page listed the trial drugs. A handwritten note read, "Early signs of confusion by week 5. Recommend full isolation." Reese flipped open another file and frowned. All of these people were tagged as protocol resistant. They didn't have a choice. In the back corner stood a box unlike the rest, labeled in thick red font. Sensitive materials, on-site review only, no reproduction. Inside were dozens of cassette tapes, each sealed in thin leather sleeves and marked with unique codes. A vintage recorder sat beside them, left there, perhaps intentionally, by someone who wanted the truth to be heard one day. Sarah picked up a tape and pressed play. A woman's voice crackled through, faint and static-laced. Day 14. Subject no longer responds to name. Emotional reaction frequency has dropped significantly. Recommend maximum dosage. No response. Shifting to isolation protocol. Papers shuffled, followed by another voice. Male, cold, mechanical. If unfit to adapt, maintain stasis. Do not compromise Phase 3 results. No external disclosures. Sarah clicked the recorder off. Her grip tightened on the handle. This wasn't research. This was control. One last file was marked distinctly. Room 309, Hollow Creek Haven. Subject, Eliza Ray. Sarah's heart skipped. She opened it slowly. Scattered notes, observation logs, cell diagrams, dosage schedules, and chilling assessments filled the folder. Continues questioning. No compliance under sedative treatment. Appears to retain staff recognition. Relocate away from primary observation zone. Defiant to medical authority. Reassigned to Kenny's team. The name Kenny appeared 3 times, ending with a final note in bright red. Protocol terminated. Long-term silence enacted as of April 20th, 2003. Reese pulled out his phone and began photographing every page. I'm taking this straight to the Department of Justice. There's no doubt anymore. This is direct evidence of intentional isolation and cover-up. Sarah bent down, carefully folded the Eliza file shut, and held it to her chest like a vow. We'll bring it all into the light. Knox stood and walked softly to her side. He didn't look at the documents. He looked down the dark hallway behind them. Sarah lifted her head. A faint breeze passed through, carrying the smell of damp wood, rusted iron, and the truth freshly unearthed. There's more, isn't there? She whispered. Knox twitched an ear, then turned, taking one quiet step ahead. A single, silent step. But enough to know the curtain hadn't fallen yet. That evening, clouds thinned over the pine-covered ridges surrounding Hollow Creek, and the sunlight drew back behind the hills, as if retreating from a truth that had finally awakened. Sarah returned to the nursing home with Reese, carrying a duplicate of the old tape, one laced with a voice colder and more terrifying than any scream. Eliza was sitting by the window. The last light of day cast a soft golden hue across her shoulder. She held a cup of tea, her hand slightly trembling, but the fire in her eyes remained, the kind of fire that never dies in someone who has survived 2 decades of darkness. Sarah placed the recorder on the table. She said nothing, just a quiet click. The sound whispered into the air, "If no response to treatment by week 3, transition to static inpatient protocol. No public annotation. Report to Kenny J. Marchand, code 0446. Eliza jolted. Her cup slipped from her grasp, her hand frozen mid-air. Then, in a moment that stretched like an entire lifetime, she whispered, "That voice, it's him. I remember it clearly. Kenny Marchand." Sarah sat upright. "You're sure?" Eliza nodded, eyes sharp as glass. "He was the last one to enter my room, before everything went black." That night, Sarah and Reese sat in a temporary records room where the team was sorting through hundreds of files and digital archives. Knox lay by the foot of the table, his head resting gently on Sarah's leg, eyes half shut, ears flicking now and then at the rustle of paper or a tap of keys. "We have a name," Reese said, sliding over a personnel extract from 2003, Kenny J. Marchand, Director of Operations, Synvia Therapeutics. He had managed not just Hollow Creek, but also held sign-off authority on financials and patient transfers across the entire phase of neural isolation therapy. He was investigated after Synvia collapsed in 2008, but there were no criminal charges. He vanished after that. Reese held up a crumpled fax with curled edges. "And this is the last address listed in the internal system, a private care facility in Utah. Current name, Silver Briar Estates." Sarah repeated the name softly. Something stirred within her, a vague but unshakable instinct. "Anyone else there?" Reese shook his head. "Unknown. But if he's still alive, he won't be anywhere he isn't in control." Sarah glanced down at Knox. He remained still, as if waiting for her question. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. Knox opened his eyes, slowly lifted his head, then stepped toward the door. One step, then turned back, waiting. Sarah stood. "We're going." The next morning they set out. The SUV glided across long stretches of highway, passing through lands that felt half forgotten, half wild. On the road, Sarah replayed another section of the tape, Kenny's voice calmly discussing, maintaining experimental structure despite patient resistance. "They weren't patients," she said, eyes locked on the road. "They were witnesses." Reese fell silent. If Eliza could recognize his voice after 20 years, then he wasn't just in charge. He orchestrated all of it. As they crossed the Utah border, sunlight caught on a metal sign, making the letters gleam. Silver Briar Estates, Comprehensive Senior Care. The iron gate creaked open. In the back seat, Knox suddenly perked up, his nose twitching. Sarah glanced at the rearview mirror. That look, she knew it well. It wasn't random. The three stepped into the reception hall. The woman behind the desk greeted them with a distracted glance. But when Sarah handed over an authorization letter from the Department of Justice, the woman's expression shifted. "Mr. Marchand?" She frowned. He's in the private wing at the back, but he's not scheduled for any visitors today." Sarah didn't wait. She pulled out her phone, flashing the provisional badge Reese had issued. The woman swallowed hard. "Unit B-17, she whispered. On the cobbled path leading to the isolated wing, Knox came to a stop. He stood still, the wind rustling through the trees above. His eyes locked on a lone villa, dark slate roof, windows drawn tight behind thick curtains. Sarah stepped beside him. "Knox!" He barked once, short and firm, just like the first time at the white wall in Hollow Creek. She turned to Reese. "He's in there." And this time Sarah understood. It wasn't just a locked room. It was a system blinded by design. A man who erased the pasts of the voiceless with nothing but a pen. She took a breath and placed her hand on the doorknob. Behind her, Knox wagged his tail gently, standing close as if to say, "Where you go, I follow." And beyond that door lay the rest of the truth. A cold draft ran opposite the hallway, carrying the metallic scent of rust, old dust, and moisture from long leaking pipes. Under flickering fluorescent lights, the tangle of tubes overhead twisted across the ceiling like veins in a forgotten machine, turning the corridor into a maze where time itself had stopped. Knox led the way, inhaling deeply before stepping forward, his claws brushing the cement in silent rhythm. His ears tilted forward, body taut with focus. And Sarah knew. Knox had picked up something that didn't belong to the present. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly ajar. Inside, an older man in a maintenance uniform with a name tag that read Dennis sat on a wooden chair near a heat vent. In his hands, a mug of coffee had long gone cold. Dennis looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes, then glanced down at Knox. The calm drained from his face. His hands trembled around the cup. "You're Dennis Turner?" Reese asked, stepping closer. The man nodded slowly. Sarah sat across from him, her voice gentle. "We need to ask you about a room. Room 309. It existed at Hollow Creek Haven. And here, too." Dennis gripped the cup tighter, hesitating. I was just following orders." "What kind of orders?" Reese pressed. Dennis swallowed hard. "They called me in for the night shift, told me to seal a wall. I had my suspicions, because before I got there, I heard—" He stopped. His eyes shifted toward the rear hallway, as if afraid someone might be listening. Knocking, not loud, just soft tapping and breathing. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Did you open it?" she asked. Dennis lowered his head. "I touched the wall's edge, and I knew it wasn't new construction. Someone was inside, but I turned away." "Why?" Reese asked quietly. "I was afraid," Dennis admitted, his voice cracking. "Afraid of losing my job. Afraid my wife would lose her insurance. Afraid they'd find someone else who wouldn't hesitate. I stayed silent, and I haven't slept in peace since." Knox stepped closer now, stopping by Dennis's leg. The dog didn't judge, didn't accuse, only looked up with deep, unreadable eyes, a look that made one confront themselves. Dennis dropped his head, tears slipping quietly onto the floor. "I didn't save anyone," he whispered, "but if I can help now—" Sarah gently placed her hand over his. "Then help us open that wall." 30 minutes later, the group followed Dennis into a side maintenance wing, not listed on any internal map. There, a narrow corridor led to a wall covered in clean, pale tiles, newer than the rest. "Here," Dennis said softly. "It's not on any blueprint." Knox stepped forward first, nose pressed close to the surface. He moved slowly, then stopped, abruptly, at a faint crack. A nearly invisible seam, detectable only if one was truly looking. Reese shone a flashlight along the edge. "There's a join here." He turned to Sarah. "We'll need tools." "No," Dennis said, his hand trembling as he reached into his jacket. "I kept it, always kept it, just in case. I found the courage." The metal jingled faintly. Then, from behind a shelf, he slid aside a rusted steel panel, revealing a hidden mechanical door, still sealed. Sarah said nothing. She gripped the handle and opened it. Inside was a small chamber, barely 3 square meters. The walls were soundproofed. No bed, no light, only a metal chair and faint marks on the floor, drag patterns left behind by feet too weak to lift. No one was there, only a single cassette tape resting on the chair. Reese picked it up, his eyes darkening. Might be the final recording. Sarah stepped back slightly, letting the light fall across Knox's face. The dog hadn't taken his eyes off the empty room. "This was the last wall," she murmured. Just a glance, and a silence that spoke louder than words. They had reached the right place, but this was only the beginning. Sarah's car pulled over beside a gravel road that led into an upscale suburban enclave just outside Scottsdale, Arizona. The sky blazed with heat, streaks of pale yellow clouds trailing slowly above rows of cream-colored villas with red tile roofs, identical to the point of unreality, a world designed to forget its past. Knox sat in the back seat, tense gaze fixed on the iron gate that read, "Whispering Palms, an independent living community." Sarah turned off the engine and took a deep breath. "We don't have a warrant, but we do have the truth." Knox tilted his head, ears up, as if in agreement. House 14. B came into view at the end of the cobbled path, smaller than she expected. Wooden door, manicured garden, misting system humming in slow rhythm, an effort to imitate peace. But there was no smell of freshly cut grass, no bird song, only a stale stillness and a figure behind the curtain. Sarah rang the bell. No response. She knocked 3 times. The door cracked open. A balding man in a thin ash-gray sweater and khaki trousers stood inside. He didn't seem defensive. His eyes, gray, cold, empty. "Who are you?" "Nolan. Sarah Nolan," she replied. "And this is Knox." The man flinched at the name. Sarah continued, not giving him time to respond. "I came for Eliza Ray, for those locked behind walls, for Glenridge, Meadowfield, Cedar Pines, and for the tape with your voice on it." He stepped back slightly. The door stayed ajar. "You are Kenny J. Marchand, but what do they call you now? Daniel? Victor?" "It doesn't matter," Kenny said flatly. Knox let out a low growl, stepping forward to stand protectively in front of Sarah, eyes locked on the man. Kenny looked down at the dog. For a moment, a flicker of unease crossed his face, even as his lips held a smirk. "So, she's alive," Kenny muttered. Sarah's fists tightened. "And alert. She remembers everything." "She wasn't supposed to survive," Kenny said, his voice lowering but hard as granite. "She was the final test, a control subject under extreme conditions, a case that should have ended." "She's a human being, not a test subject," Sarah snapped. "She's an anomaly," Kenny replied, void of remorse. "Everything I did followed protocol, reports, approvals, funding. You call that protocol? Locking a person behind a wall and erasing her from every record?" Kenny shrugged. "No one asked. No one looked." And then, Knox growled, deep, long, and rising from his chest like a warning carved from memory. The house fell silent. Kenny stepped back, bumping into the corner of a small foyer table. Sarah's voice was steady, her eyes unwavering. "He remembers your voice. Not from a tape, from the other side of a wall. The orders you gave. The justifications you whispered in defense of your process. Kenny froze. Knox's eyes, sharp, not hateful, but piercing like a blade, forced him to face what he had buried. You can change your name, your address, but you can't change the gaze of a dog who witnessed what you did. A long pause followed. The world narrowed to a man and a dog, staring across the gulf of conscience. Silence, pressing down like truth left unspoken for too long. Finally, Kenny turned away. I have nothing more to say. Sarah nodded, but didn't look away. Good, because I have plenty. She pulled a USB drive from her pocket. Copies of every record, cassette tapes, internal codes, Eliza's journal, patient lists. We've already sent them to the DOJ, the press, and everyone ever tied to the funding program. You're not disappearing again. Kenny dropped onto the sofa, his eyes staring blankly at the wall like a captionless painting. Every layer of escape, legal teams, aliases, money, meant nothing against the unwavering gaze of loyalty that never stopped speaking. Knox turned toward the door. Sarah laid a hand on his back. Together they walked away. No one needed to lock the door behind them, because the truth had already unlocked it. That morning, Hollow Creek Haven wore a quieter face than usual. Soft sunlight filtered through the branches of leafless trees, washing the white stone steps in a gentle glow, as if the air itself was learning how to breathe again after years of secrets weighing it down. Sarah and Knox returned to the old building, the place that had once echoed with barks, with silent interrogations, with walls that swallowed human souls. But this time, it was just them, and the same unshaken persistence. The wall where Eliza had once been found had been repaired, yet one odd patch of paint remained, as if even time itself refused to erase what had once been marked by the footsteps and nose of a dog who knew how to listen. Maybe there's still something left, Sarah whispered, as Knox stopped in front of a small iron door at the end of the west corridor, a place once permanently sealed under the pretense of obsolete maintenance access. Knox gently pressed his nose to the edge of the door, then turned to look at Sarah. She understood. No words were needed. The old management key turned smoothly in the lock. As the door creaked open, a fine mist of dust floated out, like the last breath of a memory long buried. Inside was a small, windowless room. No control panels, no furniture. Only a rusted metal rack, a steel filing cabinet, and a wooden box coated in dust. Sarah switched on her flashlight. The beam swept across the wall, catching a faded label on the lid of the box. Prototype, self-adaptive sensor data, Synvia project. Knox stepped forward, sniffed the air, then lay down, as if to confirm that no one had been left behind. Sarah opened the box. Inside were strange medical instruments, sensor wires, tubes fine as strands of hair, and an old control unit with a tiny LED display. Every item was tagged with internal symbols and codes she had never seen before. At the bottom of the box was a leather envelope tied with a red wax cord. Sarah opened it, and her heart sank slightly. Inside was a list of 3 other facilities, not printed in bold, just 3 lines of short, typed text. Summit Grove Care Center, Idaho. Marrow Ridge Rehabilitation, New Mexico. The Briar Hill Study Unit, Nevada. No exact addresses, but attached was a faded Synvia memo, barely legible. Only transfer subject under absolute condition. Reference silent cycle 3.2, avoid exposure over 12 hours to non-verified handlers. Sarah slowly sank to the cold floor. A breeze from the hallway slipped through the doorframe, making a sound like a whisper. She didn't shiver from fear, but from the weight of a truth far greater than she had imagined. Knox moved closer and gently touched her hand with his nose, as if to say, "We're not done, but we're ready now." She gave a tired but clear smile. "You always knew where to look, didn't you?" Knox gave a soft wag of his tail, every movement deliberate and calm, as if within that deep gray coat lived a soul that never stopped believing in the silent call of forgotten hallways. Sarah slipped the list into her coat pocket, her gaze lingering on the walls, aged yet strangely renewed. Knox's eyes still fixed on something unseen, a point in space where the truth quietly beckoned them toward the next chapter. And they left that room, with nothing more to hide, no one left behind bricks and mortar, but with the certainty that what is right never stays buried under dust. Eliza Ray sat in a velvet-cushioned chair inside the Special Care Recovery Unit. Her hands, still bearing traces of time, now trembled less. Her gaze had cleared since the day she was rescued. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the thin white curtain, casting a soft blush on her cheek, as if life was returning, little by little, from deep within her. Sarah sat beside her in silence. Knox lay just beneath Eliza's feet, his chin resting gently on her slipper like a living pillow. Since Eliza had been moved to the Special Care Center, Knox had shown up every afternoon. There was something beyond instinct, an unspoken promise between two souls once forgotten by the world. "Do you remember anything else?" Sarah asked softly, just as the nurse stepped out with the evening dose. Eliza went still for a moment, then slowly turned her head. "There were names I thought I'd forgotten, but now they're back." Sarah straightened up, notebook ready. "Say everything, as much as you can." Eliza began, her voice raspy but steady. "I remember someone named Louis Drayton. He was a psychologist, but after opposing a harmful experiment, they moved him to the basement. And Catherine Yu, a nurse. She used to sneak food to patients who were cut off. And a young woman named Mara, barely in her 20s. She once said, if anyone survived, they had to tell the story." Knox lifted his head at the name Mara, as if it stirred something deeper, a rhythm of memory not bound to humans alone. "Eliza," Sarah asked quietly, "did you ever hear strange sounds? Like recordings or someone trying to leave a message?" Eliza nodded slowly. "Once, I heard a faint clicking from the ventilation shaft. Then a voice. Thin, weak, but clear. It was Mara. She whispered, 'If someone hears this, find Knox. Only Knox. .. Sarah felt the room pause. The wind outside passed through the pine trees with a subtle tone, as if it, too, was listening. "Eliza," Sarah exhaled, "how did she know about Knox?" "We saw a picture of him once, in an old news story, back when Knox was still with the rescue unit. She said, if anyone has ever walked through darkness without fear, it's that dog." Sarah leaned down, locking eyes with Knox, eyes that never looked away when a soul needed to be held. "Do you remember where she was?" Sarah asked, her voice now barely a whisper. Eliza squinted, as if trying to unfold each crease of memory. "She was once taken to a place with the word Briar in it. I'm not sure if it was the name of the facility or just the area, but there was a room. 204. They moved her after she refused to drink what they called the emotional stabilizing solution." Sarah noted every word. 204. Briar. Eliza turned, eyes glistening. She was the bravest person I ever knew. If there's still someone being held, I believe it's her. That was the moment something inside Sarah, the lingering anger, the uncertainty, the growing weight of responsibility, all settled into a single, unwavering resolve. Knox stood up then, walked to Eliza, and gently rested his head on her knee. Eliza said nothing. Her trembling hand ran along his spine, not with hesitation, not with fear. "I'll find her," Sarah said. "I'll search all 3 remaining facilities. And if Mara's still alive, I'll bring her home. Knox will bring her home." Eliza didn't respond aloud, but her lips moved slightly, like a whisper sent into a silence that had lasted 20 long years. "Thank you for not staying silent." Late autumn sunlight laid a soft gold over the forest floor in the low mountains of North Carolina. Maple leaves drifted down like memories, one layer at a time, soundless. In the patch of earth behind a small wooden cabin that had once been Sarah's home, a smooth white stone sat quietly among the late-blooming wild daisies. Knox, the one who heard what the world forgot. The inscription was simple, but to Sarah it carried more weight than any medal or citation she had ever seen in her life. On a cold morning in early winter, he had rested his head on Sarah's lap as usual, took a long breath, and gently closed his eyes. Knox passed away peacefully. Sarah wept, not because she lost a dog, but because she knew she had just said goodbye to the only companion who had never turned away from the darkest corners of this world. Not once. 2 years have passed since that day. Sarah is no longer the quiet former officer surrounded by case files. She is now the founder of the Echo Project, an independent organization dedicated to investigating abuse in long-term care facilities, the very kind of institutions where inhumane trials like Synvia Therapeutics once took root. With a small team of journalists, investigators, and former medical workers, the organization has helped expose at least 9 centers showing signs of neuro-isolation therapy disguised as treatment. They didn't wait for government action. They went first. They knocked on doors long sealed. They listened to the whispers, the stories dismissed as lacking evidence, and above all, they believed in the very first bark. Sarah still keeps Knox's old leash on a shelf in her office, next to a fabric patch embroidered with "Vigilant beyond silence." That afternoon, she stood on the second-floor balcony, a cup of black tea in hand, her eyes on the pine forest slowly turning silver. She had just returned from a site survey in Oregon, a newly transferred nursing home, quiet hallways, unlabeled rooms, and a basement no one had thoroughly inspected yet. The report revealed nothing suspicious, but one thing stayed with her: a wall that didn't match the floor plan. And more than that, a faint crack near the base where the paint had chipped, as if someone once tried to knock, hoping someone might hear. Sarah had stared at it for a long while, then turned away. But before she stepped out of the hallway, she heard something stir inside. A familiar echo from another time. A low, firm bark. The kind she had heard 100 times before, in moments when no one else believed, and only one creature stared at the wall and said in his own way, "There's someone there." Sarah stopped, gently laid her hand against the wall. She didn't break it down. Not yet. But she knew. Soon, the Echo Project would return, with the right tools, legal clearance, and every reason they needed. And when they did, she would bring Knox's leash, not to lead the way, but to remind the world. There are those who never give up on listening, even after they're no longer here. Sarah turned back toward the forest behind the cabin, where Knox rested. A soft smile formed. "We're not done yet, old friend." In the distance, a herd of deer moved slowly across the sunset, unafraid. The wind brushed against the eaves, and somewhere, the bark that once fell silent echoed again in the hearts of those who remembered. The story of Knox is not just one of a daring rescue or a shocking investigation. It stands as proof of something simple, yet too often lost in today's world: the patience to listen and the courage not to turn away. A German shepherd, a breed known for its intelligence, loyalty, and sense of duty, became the key to unearthing secrets buried for 20 years. In Knox, we see the spirit of those who refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice, no matter how small or disregarded they may be. In Sarah, we find those willing to step out of comfort and stand for truth and the vulnerable. The message left behind is clear. Never underestimate the bark of a dog or the silence of a wall, because sometimes it is from the smallest signs that light is found in darkness. Cherish the quiet souls beside us. Honor the dogs, especially German shepherds, not just for their bravery, but because they remain faithful, even when the world turns away. Because sometimes truth is awakened by a single knock and a gaze that never looks away.